No. Well, we'd like to welcome you to Leadership with Vision. We are kind of waiting on some people to join in with us, and we want to discuss with you some ideas about missionary training. We're going to give you just a few minutes to jump in if you're interested. We are going to discuss actual questions that came in from the field. And so let me, we're going to give it about a minute, and then we're going to start up. You got anything you want to say while we wait for that minute?
Well, while we wait for that, let me invite you to our next event, which is our camp, and that is coming June 18th through the 22nd in North Georgia, and so that'll be in Trenton, Georgia. Looking forward to that. We also have a pastors conference coming up. That'll be May 7th, 8th, and 9th. So we have a pastors conference in May, and then we have a camp that is from June 18th to the 22nd. That would be great. If you would be interested in that, you can find that on visionmissions.com/events. A lot of those different things. Our Generation Pastors, ogpastors.com. You could also find information on that as well.
All right. Are you ready?
I am ready when you are.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and start up the podcast. I would like to welcome you to Leadership with Vision. This is Austin Gardner and co-host Jeff Bush, and we're excited to be with you today talking about missionary training ideas. And I hope this is a blessing to you and something that you can discuss. You can feel free to ask questions in the comments, and we'll try to ask them as we go along. And we'll run here a good 20 or 30 minutes and just talk about what we feel like might be some good ideas to help as you get started. You want to say a couple of words? No, I'd like to talk about, real quick, I want to mention Burkina Faso, but go ahead.
Okay. Yes, sir. First of all, I want to welcome those that are watching. Our goal throughout the podcast to help missionaries, encourage missionaries that are, some that are on the road, many that are on the field. Whether you're with Vision or not, we are thankful for what you're doing on the field, and we hope to be a blessing to you and encouragement along the way. If you have questions, like Pastor's already said, shoot us those questions. We'll answer it right here on this podcast, and I think it'll be a help and a blessing.
We'll try to keep it live, and we'll go right on into discussions. Fact is, you might could actually come on live and ask your question there. What did...
So, Patricio Sheridan, hey, brother. He's in Chile. He says, out making a hospital visit. Wish I could stick around, but got to run. Appreciate you, man. Thank you, brother.
We appreciate you, brother, and excited about that new building and all that God's doing down there with you.
Amen.
And I don't know about that beard, but anyway, you're looking like a woolly booger. All right. I just had the privilege of coming back. There are 9 of us that went to Burkina Faso, and we had the wonderful, awesome privilege of meeting again with brothers and sisters in Christ that we know in Burkina Faso, and we saw 3 missionaries that our church supports and loves and honors, and then we saw a couple we don't support, but we love and respect. And so we were able to be with Keith Shoemaker, and he has been a missionary in Burkina Faso for many years, and I think 13 churches have been started. Amen. And that's fantastic. And then Vicente Garcia is there. Vicente is a tremendous man of God. He is Mexican, lived in America as an illegal alien, went south to Peru for 5 years and trained and got ready to go, and he's starting a church, and he's doing a great job. Wonderful family. Some great news coming out about that family here pretty soon, as they are, Lord willing, adopting a child, and we'll be able to tell you about that. And then, of course, we saw Jason and Charity Rishel. They are members of another church, but they're served with Vision Missions, and that was great to see them. And they're finishing up their 2-year program on the field, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about here in just a minute. So it was a real honor and privilege to see all of them and to be able to see what God's doing there in Burkina Faso.
Amen. Well, we love both the Shoemaker family and the Rishel family, Vicente Garcia as well. And so thank God for that. I think it's interesting because Pastor already said we're going to talk about several of these things in missionary training. And so please jump in. If you've got some questions, we'd like to hear them as well.
Sure, we'd love to talk to you. Also, there's the Knickerbocker family is over there, and the Hill House family. And, of course, I like the Hill Houses, but they are the Hill House. Mike Hillhouse's dad and mom are Randy and Phyllis Sturwalt's best friends. and so I'll never see him again without thinking about that. One of the greatest missionaries I've ever known, Brother Randy Sturwalt, and so it was such a privilege to be able to see all these people in there. So we'll jump right in. Feel free to come on in. We got questions and answers. We're going to bounce around for the next 20 minutes or so. So feel free to jump in and discuss with us.
Okay, first question. What are the benefits for a missionary's finishing deputation to go work with a veteran missionary on the field?
Well, we could write a book about that, couldn't we? First off, if there's somebody on the field when you land, it is going to be so much easier because they're going to pave the way for you. They're going to help your wife to fit in better, and they're going to help you to learn how to adapt. If it's the right missionary, they're really going to help you. So when you land on the field, just landing by yourself in a country where you don't know anyone, where you have no idea about anything, it's a big deal to have a friend and have somebody that can help you. Plus, you got language learning, you got culture, you've got church work overseas. It is a massive difference to live there and work there than it is here. So I'll let Jeff jump in here, but I would tell you, I strongly suggest it. We make exceptions only when we have to. We always want our missionaries to go where there is a veteran who can help them and pave the way for them.
I think if we're not careful, sometimes we think, I've already done my Bible college, or I've already raised my deputation or whatever. I'm finished with the prep work. Now it's time to go do the real work. All of our lives we're going to be growing. In all of our lives we're going to be learning. If we stop learning, we stop growing, we stop doing ministry. And so we have to. Part of this going to work under somebody, you're on the field now, but now you're getting into the water. And so this is the best way. Here's one of the questions concerning that, Pastor. Why shouldn't I just go work with a national pastor instead of with an American missionary?
First off, let me say the Brewsters, who wrote the Language Acquisition Made Practical book, the LAMP book, they said you ought to take one suitcase per person in the family and live 90 days before you speak to one person who speaks your language. So you spend 90 days, you parachute into the country, and you go spend 90 days living in the home of another family. So you rent a space in their house. You can't speak, they can't speak, and it forces you to learn the language, and that's a good way to learn the language. I don't know anything about anybody else, but I've been married for 44 and a half years, and I will tell you, had we done that, my wife would have gone off the deep end. She would have been in the loony bin, and things would have been horrible. So I think that you need some of that crossing over from one culture to another culture, and you need a bridge. The national doesn't understand you, even if he speaks the language. The first question would be, does that national speak your language? And if he doesn't even speak your language, how do you understand him? How does he understand you? And so how do you get started in that? So my suggestion would be you go find a missionary who can help you and get you through those rough parts. Where do you buy a car? How do you buy a car? How do you get all your paperwork done? A national often has no idea about visa requirements because they're not required to have a visa. They don't know anything about living as a foreigner, as an expatriate in another country. They don't have any idea. Another expat can help you with that. It is a big mistake to spend too much time with an expat. It is a big mistake to spend too much time in your language, but you are going to face a shock like you have never faced in your life when you parachute into a country and you don't know what's going on. Now, if you were moving from Georgia to California, I think you can work with a national. If you were moving if you're moving from Georgia to England, you could work with a national. They speak your language. The cultures, though different, are much more similar. But if you were parachuting into a country like Burkina Faso, where we just were, or China, I think you definitely need help.
So I would say, Pastor's already said language, but as well as culture. There's so many things that another missionary would understand that you're getting ready to go through that a national would not understand. And so maybe those cultural blunders, or maybe that you would do as an American with the food, you ask somebody there, how can I get used to the food? Well, that's the only food they've ever had. Or how can I buy a vehicle? And say, well, I've never even had a vehicle. Or how can I start a church? I've never started a church. You're doing a lot of things, so you need somebody a missionary who understands what you're getting ready to go through, everything about it. Here's another question right there, Pastor.
It will save you a lot of time.
Yeah.
It will save you a lot of time to get through that. And I'd like to remind you that when you're dealing with two cultures, see, what you think is normal, they find offensive. What they think is normal, you find offensive. So I'm going to tell you, it would be a good deal for somebody to help you. Go ahead.
Okay, so someone has underneath that, somebody has a question. Why should I just start a working in English until I can do the new language? In other words, should I just jump in and start?
Please don't do that. First off, if you let English become your crutch, it'll become exactly that, your crutch. And you will use English all the time, and you'll never learn the language. And if you speak a language that people know in their head, you can reach their head. But if you speak what they know in their heart, you can reach their heart. You need to learn to speak the heart language. And the hardest thing in the world for all of us is learning the language. That's the hardest part of all. And so if you go and try to use language as a crutch, you're going to get in trouble. So if I were in Peru and you had been coming down to visit with me, or to start working with me, I'd let you preach one message that I would translate. And then after that, you spoke no more until you could do it in Spanish. And I would strongly suggest that you not fall in the trap. Years ago, a fellow actually came here to our church and said that in China, he was just trying to be funny. He didn't mean it disrespectfully. He wasn't being ugly. He is a good man of God. But he said, he didn't have time to learn English. And he said, by the way, you can just say yabba dabba do, and people in China will get saved. Now, he was joking, but the facts are that some people somehow think everybody everywhere understands English, and they don't understand English. And if they do understand English, they understand it at a very superficial level, nothing that reaches down into the heart. Let me give you a story. My dad, who's now in heaven, he's a good man. He loved missions. He gave a lot of money to missions. He supported missionaries. When my dad visited me in Mexico, he came back in the house one day. He said, I know these people understand English. He said, they're faking it. They act like they don't understand me, but I know they do. Everybody does. And so my dad, when he would talk to somebody who didn't understand his English, he'd get louder and louder and louder because he thought, are they deaf? Are they dumb? What's their problem? Why can't they understand? And you can mock that and laugh at that, but that question tends to be the kind of question my dad might have asked, which shows a complete lack of respect for that culture and those people.
We think it's a shortcut. Just jump into ministry. Somebody can translate for me and do, whatever, so I can just start preaching or whatever. But that shortcut in the long run is going to really hinder your ministry in the progress of everything you're doing. You need to learn the language. You need to be under a missionary, under somebody who's going to be able to correct you, who's going to be able to help you, who's ever going to be able to show you the ropes of what you're going to be doing when you get there.
Now, we never tell you to let a missionary teach you the language.
Sure.
So we want a national to teach you the language because that way you get closer to the exact way the language ought to work. But one of the biggest mistakes made on a mission field is not as much language as it is culture. It is in Latin America, for example, if you turn your back on anybody, that's a big insult. So if you're in a conversation and somebody comes up behind you and is trying to listen in, you open the circle, you move your back so it's not in front of them. Americans never even think that. I can see a person here in America that's been a missionary, and I can watch them, and I know they know. You can see them make the moves that show the respect that is considered there. And so I was in my house in Mexico, and I was barefooted, and my Mexican friend who was helping me said, you don't ever want to do that again. Don't let a Mexican come in here and you be barefooted. Well, in lots of parts of the world, you would be barefooted. So you just need help learning all those things.
We have a couple different people, several different people on here. Adam Walls is in Taiwan with John Walls, VBM missionary, and praise God for that. Thanks for watching. Several different friends are there. Thank you very much. We have several questions underneath that. So here's our goal. You finished deputation. Of course, you're prepared. You've got your Bible training, but you're now going over there. You're in a new culture. You're in a new language. You're in a new ministry. Everything's brand new. So you're working under this missionary. So here's one of the questions that comes. Am I there to learn from the veteran missionary? Am I a student working under that missionary?
Well, I would hope so. First off, every man is your teacher, and you should get rid of a lot of that arrogance and pride that makes you think all of a sudden you're an expert. In no other line of work except Christianity, ministry, do you think that you can just finish school and know stuff. If you're a doctor, you'd go to school forever, and then you'd serve as an intern, and then you'd work under somebody, and finally, years later, you'd break out into your own private practice or whatever. And so, let's be honest, you went to Bible college and you studied a few classes and you learned some Bible, but you don't know about living overseas. You've never lived overseas. And if your mama lived overseas or your dad lived overseas, I've known nationals that came to America, lived in America, and when they went back to the field, they couldn't handle it. So you need training and all that, but you need that missionary. And yeah, you're there as a student. You're there. The senior missionary ought to treat you with respect, but you should go there saying, I need to learn. I'm here to learn. I need you to teach me, and I will lovingly submit to your leadership and direction.
Okay, so we hope and trust. Read different books. They're going to be very good for you. But listen, just because we have a book knowledge doesn't mean we have the actual experience. And so being under that missionary, yeah, your attitude is going to set the stage for a lot of things you do. So learning under that missionary as a student, instead of thinking that you have something to teach. In fact, if you have something to teach, it would be like if you're the assistant in that ministry, and that's what you are. You're the student, you're the assistant working under that missionary. You may go from there in 2 years and start your own ministry, and praise God. But until then, it's not your responsibility to correct the missionary, his family, his ministry, or anything. You're there to learn as much as you can. Somebody even asked Pastor, what are some of the things specifically that I should be learning from the missionary while I'm working under him?
Well, I think one of the main things you'll learn is how to deal with cross-cultural things. What's offensive and not offensive? What's the right way to speak and the wrong way to speak? What's the right way to deal with things at church? What are the, and later on you'll be able to test your own weapons, and later on you'll be able to figure out, you might not agree with everything someone said, but while you're an apprentice, while you're still learning, you want to say, all right, how does he preach? How does he do the church service? Why does he do the church service like this? How does he witness to people? How does he deal with couples? How do you deal with all these things that are just so anti-American? Maybe a man married to multiple wives, or a person living in, they take people into their home and they have extra people living in their house and they act like they're family, and you come to find out they're not family, and it's, they're not as individualized as America. So just a lot of things you want to learn. No matter where I go in the world, I try to obey. I just got back from Burkina Faso, and I'll tell you what I did. I did what I was told, when I was told, the way I was told, and tried to have a right heart attitude at all times. So that's how we ought to work. If you came to my church to preach, you ought to walk into my church with that same attitude. And if you came on my church staff, that ought to be the attitude you have. And therefore, that's what we're aiming to do when we get to the field.
Here's what I think that a very big problem could be if we're not careful. A missionary goes through deputation, and then he arrives to the mission field. While on deputation, many times he's told that, this is our hero. He's the man of God. He's the hope for that country or whatever. If we're not careful, we let all that get to our head. And then we think, I really am the man. Man, I'm just great. And so you get over on the field, and now instead of being treated like the hero, now you're treated like the guy who's a baby learning a new language, and hey, run over here and help me do this. And now you're not the guy in charge. And many missionaries, they cannot take it. They cannot get back under and submit themselves. And if you can't, let me tell you, if you're not going, you'll never be a good leader unless you're a good follower. And you'll never be a good teacher if you're not a good student. So your responsibility is to learn all you can, not just in language, but even if you have more ministry experience, still your job is, what can I learn? That guy's been over there longer than you. He knows more culture. He knows more language. He knows more about that ministry, about that people. He knows more than everything than you do in that specific area, and you have to humble yourself.
Well, Jesus said, and that's what I'll be preaching this Sunday, Jesus said, if you want to be a leader, you need to be a servant. If you want to be in charge, you need to take care of the weak and the helpless like the small child. And so the very idea that we go with that arrogance, and the very idea that we go unteachable, Young missionaries often, they got the call and they're the man of God and they won't listen and they're unteachable and they end up getting hurt. And we don't want you to get hurt. If we can help it, we'd like to keep you from being hurt.
Here's a couple more questions under this point. What are the dangers if we have the wrong attitudes, and how do we keep from having those attitudes?
Well, if you came to work with me and you had a bad attitude, I would just back off. And I'd say, well, do your thing, do it your way. And I wouldn't say that to you. I'd just pull back because I'm not going to be confrontational and fight with you and tell you that I'm in charge. I'm going to be like, well, if that's what you decide you want to do, you handle it the best way you can. And then when you get in trouble, I wouldn't say any of this, but when you get in trouble, I'll still be here waiting to help you. So what you're doing is you're cutting yourself off from the person that can most help you. And everybody needs help. We are to love one another, forgive one another, support one another. It's a one another ministry in the Bible. And so if you have the wrong attitude, you're going to limit your ministry severely. If you have the wrong attitude, you're going to cause people not to listen to you. You're going to shut off your ministry. Very likely you'll overcome it. God's going to do something. But you know what is a sad fact? Most missionaries don't make it. They don't make it past one term. They don't make 2 terms. They're not able to get a church started. I talked to a missionary years ago. His pastor actually sent him to me and said, if you can't help him, we're going to drop him. And he's out of our church, and we're not going to let him be a missionary out of our church anymore. And so I got him there, and he had no idea. And I said to him, do you know why you're here? He said, yeah, you just want me to come down and visit you. I said, no, you're here because you're not getting anything done. And I said, what have you done? He said, I've lived there 10 years. I said, well, a lot of people live there 10 years. You're there to get people saved. You're there to get lives changed. You're there to start a church. Have you led anybody to Christ? No. Have you started a church? No. And the poor guy had no idea. He wasn't trained. That's why you want to get there. And if you cut yourself off from that, if you cut yourself off from that training, if you cut yourself off from that help, you're hurting you. You're hurting the work. You may end up quitting. And so why don't we listen and learn?
Amen. Here's another question that goes with that. What happens if I disagree with a veteran missionary? What should I do?
Be quiet. Unless it is a moral issue, unless it is a doctrinal issue, you're there to learn. And that means that oftentimes he won't do things the way you do, and you might not like the way he does it. For the time that you're under his leadership, I would tell you to just do what he says do and follow his leadership. And then when you're on your own, you can go do your own. If there's an opportunity, if he asks for your input, if you say it in the right way, you might could discuss something with him. If you worked on my church staff and you came in here and told me, I'm going to tell you how to run this church, I wouldn't want you working here. And so in the same way, you're there and you need to just listen and learn. And as soon as you're on your own, you can try it your way. But until then, I would just keep my mouth shut, put my head down, and go about learning what I was there to learn.
The sad truth is many times in our circles, the Baptist circles, many times that we separate from each other, it has nothing to do with doctrinal reasons. It has much to do with our personality, with our preferences. I don't like the music that he chose, or the dress that he has, or the way he disciplines his children, or the way that he talked to me, or we just don't see eye to eye on these.
Or he won't let me be the boss.
and to be honest, I mean, that is to the core what Christ taught, that you and we need to learn to die to ourselves and keep our mouths shut and find where we fit in. And I mean, if it's a doctrinal issue, maybe you need to stand up. You need to say something. But most of the time, it's not. And I think if we'll learn to, hey, until it's your time, you zip your lips. That's not your pulpit. That's not your thing. You know that on deputation. We need to learn that on the mission field just the same way.
Amen.
So next question would go in this question, it says, what are some reasonable goals to accomplish while I'm working with the missionary?
Well, I think the number one goal is to learn the language and get fluent in the language. So you take that. We suggest to our missionaries that they go. We want them to go for 2 years under a veteran missionary. At the end of that 2 years, they'll come back and take 3 to 6 months to get any additional support and visit family, and then go for a good solid 4 years to get their church started and going. So for 2 years, our number one goal is learn the language. So you got to get set up. You got to learn the language and learn it well. You should be speaking the language, preaching in the language. If you're in one of the countries where it's harder to do that, you may need more than 2 years for that first time around to get everything ready, because the language is your horse, and you're not going to get far down the road if you don't have a horse. You got to learn how to ride the horse, and that's the language. The second thing you need to learn is culture. You need to be in many homes. You need to, and if you're under the veteran missionary and you mess up and you hurt somebody's feelings, he can go to them and say, look, he's a dingbat. He's brand new. He doesn't know. Let's help teach him. Let's help train him. And so the people in the church that help train missionaries, they'll understand that. Then you should learn how to do ministry. So you're going there, and so you follow the leadership of the other guy. You might not understand why he does what he does. You may not understand what the purpose is, but you can be learning from whatever he's doing, and you can apply that into your ministry and into your life. And so you are all the time, through all of this that's going on, you are learning everything you can, so that when you get ready to go start your ministry, you're like, done it, tried it. I've killed the lion, I've killed the bear, I've learned the language, I've learned the culture. You're never through learning. You will never be through learning the language. You will never be through learning culture, and you'll never be through learning ministry, but you got a good start.
Amen. When I served in Peru, learning before I headed to Argentina, many of these things that Pastor said, he let me do, and many of the mistakes that I made. In fact, I remember taking a family, and I was so excited. Man, I was inviting people right and left to come to church. Every taxi driver I met, every person, I was trying to invite them. And a lot of people were kind. Yeah, I'll go, and they never showed up. One family ended up coming, a husband and wife and 2 kids. They were older kids in, I guess, university. And so I was so excited. And Pastor said, why don't you introduce your guest? And I stood up, man, I was proud. And I was like, this is Jose and Maria, or whatever their names were. And, they're my guests today. And I said, and they're from this area of the city. And I said the neighborhood. To me, it made no difference. I didn't care. And they sat back down, and they had a look. And I was like, I didn't understand why. And afterwards, Pastor came up and said, do you realize when you said they're from that area of the town, everybody knows, and it was an embarrassing thing. It was a cultural blunder I made, and I had no idea.
The time you introduced your friend and said, here's my barber. Yeah. They don't like me. You don't tell people what they do unless it's prestigious.
So maybe I made a lot more mistakes than I want to admit.
Don't we all? We all do.
But it was during that time, Pastor let me do the Lord's Supper, and I learned to baptisms.
In Spanish.
Baptisms, all kinds of different things. I started working with the youth class and teaching and doing all these different. So when I arrived to Argentina and started the first church, I had already done so many of these different things. And let me tell you, for the guy who's out there saying, so you want me to raise my money for deputation and go over just sit there and learn a language? Not at all. We're saying do the ministry, but you do it under somebody who's going to correct you and help you, so that when it's your turn, now you'll do it in the right way.
And you do the ministry in the language.
Amen.
So yeah, you're going to have to sit there for a while. Language school, at the very beginning, you're going to go out and invite people to church, and you're going to be like, you, church, pray, you. And they're going to look at you like, what in the world is wrong with you? So you get a national to go with you that can do the talking. You just got to understand you are going to do the ministry, but you got to learn how to talk. And basically, you're going to go from being a 30-year-old expert in church work that you think you are to a 1-year-old who can't talk. When people talk to you, can't understand, and when you talk to them, they can't understand. And you're just a blabbering idiot. You have no idea what you're saying. They have no idea what you're saying. You got a lot to learn.
Pastor, you just came back from Burkina Faso, and probably an ideal guy who's working under somebody else. You told us a lot of what Jason Rischel's doing. He's doing a very good job. Maybe you can share with how he's doing the ministry, but he's still learning under somebody.
Jason is learning French, and he's already preaching in French. He can already translate in French. He's been there over a year. He had some previous experience. When Keith is on the road, he takes over the entire church service. He translated for several people. He's not yet all the way there, but it takes a long time. He has a children's club. He has led people to Christ. I don't know, 15 or 20 people have been led to Christ. He's baptized people. He He is doing the work. He is in full missionary mode and ready to step out in his next stage of ministry. He'll come back here, raise a little more support, and then move on to his next area of ministry where he will be able to take off running because he got a good foundation.
So the idea sometimes can be, well, I'm not supposed to do anything while I'm learning the language. Well, that's what you're supposed to be focused on. But it would be great that you leave those 2 years saying, I've led people to Christ, I've seen this happen, I've preached, I've participated in all these different things, and now he's even more prepared than the average guy. I mean, he's going to do a great job.
You're reading the Bible in the language. You're never missing church services. You're always going on visitation. You're at all the couples meetings. You're at all the men's meeting if you're a man. You're at all the women's meeting if you're a woman. You're going to everything because you're a missionary. And as a missionary, you may not know the language yet. I sat through so many of those things like, what in the world is happening?
Let me give this last question here, maybe in this section. And it says, so how many hours approximately should I be learning from the missionary, spending with veteran missionary, and how many hours should I be working in the language?
Well, when you first start the language, our expectation of you is a minimum of 20 hours a week in a structured language learning environment. It could be a tutor, but it needs to be structured by the missionary. It could be a language school. It just needs to have real structure. Then after that, you need to spend another 20 to 40 hours, if you're a man, practicing everything you've learned. And then, you could practice by going to the men's meeting where you don't understand a thing, but you're listening. You learn a language by listening first, then talking, then reading, then writing. And so if you go to that meeting and you just start picking up words that you didn't know you knew, and you start learning slowly. So I'm going to tell you, it's not a certain number of hours. You're learning by looking. You're learning by watching. You're learning by being with him. You go be with him. In Mark 3:14, Jesus called 12 men that they might be with him. Gunter Krallman called that witness. And so you go be with the missionary. It's not like you got to go in and sit down and he gives you a class. It's more like you're watching, you're following, and you're learning as he does things.
Okay, Pastor, this is all that I have under this topic before we change topics for another one. But let me just tell you, the friends that are listening, our goal is that you could be the most effective missionary. Now, that doesn't mean that how many years you're going to be there or whatever, but with the time that God gives you, you could be the most effective missionary. And we believe to do that, you have to have the right preparation, the right training, and then take the right steps. Sometimes we have to humble ourselves to take those right steps. But if you prepare right, then you'll do the ministry right.
So many missionaries, and the older they get, the harder they are to talk to. Like they get started late, and they think they know everything. And they think they know culture, and they think they know how to do the work over in another place. And this is what ends up happening when they get to the field. They'll find out they're not near as smart as they thought they were. And it's going to be a lot more frustrating than they thought. And yet their pride won't let them. So here's the deal. You're going to listen sooner or later. God's going to teach you one way or another. You can take it the easy way with somebody trying to help you, or you can go to the school of hard knocks. Do you know why it's called the school of hard knocks? Because they're hard knocks. Because it's boom, hit you and hurt you. And so you can learn from others. My dad used to say, you're not going to live long enough to make all the mistakes. Why don't you learn from somebody else's? Amen. So I would strongly suggest you get a mentor. I would strongly suggest you get a missionary to work with. I would strongly suggest that you learn to have the right attitude about learning from others.
We certainly appreciate you being here. Several different missionaries with vision, other friends, other missionaries, and other people watching. Thank you so much. We are going to come back later and make another podcast. We want to say thank you. We'd love for you to jump on and send us maybe a question or a comment. We'd love to hear from you. But thank you for taking this time. We appreciate it very much.
And God bless every one of you. Thank you so very much. And thank you for listening to Leadership with Vision.